Welcome back to the Steel City Roundtable. I'm your host, Mark Kneebone. It's great to be back talking to you guys. It's been a little while. I've had some things going on in my life that have taken priority, unfortunately, but I'm back with a banger. I got a great man, a humanitarian, a very good guy. Even though he works for the other side when I was a police officer, he might be the devil, he might not be, but he's a good dude. His name is Todd Hollis. Todd Hollis, say hello.
What's up? Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to your platform. I am honored.
Oh, I've been waiting for this since I scheduled it like 2 months ago. I met Todd when I was a rookie police officer here in Pittsburgh. You're talking like back in 2007, 2008, when I still thought I was like big guy on the mountain and I was going to accomplish all kinds of things. So we met through the court system, and had a really good relationship. So I'm glad to have you here, brother. Do me a
Thank
favor. Why don't you just tell people a little bit real quickly about who you are, what you're about, and why you decided to come on this platform with me?
Well, who am I? I think at the core of who I am is that I believe that I'm a good guy trying to make the world better. I mean, I might say sound cliche-ish, but I do my very best to make the world better. I graduated from Duquesne undergrad, Duquesne Law School. I passed the bar in 1994. I started my career off at the public defender's office. I did preliminary hearings. I think, that was probably one of the best experiences of my legal career. I got a chance to meet police officers like you. I got a chance to, see how the system worked, to meet the judges, to learn the rules, so to speak. But I think more importantly, it was the relationships that I formed along the way. So now I am a civil rights attorney. Um, I love my job. It's really not. Yeah, I know. But you know what? I think the goal is to make the world a better place, not just for the client that you're dealing with, but also for all of us, right? I mean, we want to make sure that nobody's overreaching. We want to make sure that the laws are being followed, equal and indiscriminately, right? And I believe you can do that job and you can be ethical in how you go about it. I believe that, police officers have a very, very tough job. Um, you know, I always say, to some of the people who say, police officers are the bad guys, but in reality, they're the first persons that you call, right? I mean, they're the people that, you want to walk into the zone of danger and to make peace. Um, so I hold them accountable, just like I would myself, just like I would another lawyer. Um, and I believe that our police departments, have a responsibility to make sure that their officers are properly trained, that they get, the needed um, uh, education that they need in order to do their jobs to the best of their abilities. And I believe some police departments are better than others. But I'm always, I'm never focused on demeaning a police officer. I'm always focused on helping to educate, either the department or the individual officer so that they become a better person.
Well, like I said, I have a lot of respect for you because,
Thank you.
being we were on two different sides, but we're part of the same system when I was a cop. You're out there to protect your client, and make sure you represent them to to their benefit. Meanwhile,
True.
the cops are there to make sure that, they are representing the victims and the law to its
Absolutely.
benefit. Now,
Absolutely.
as a blanket statement, and I have no problem saying this, I think at least 75% of cops now do not know how to act in a courtroom. And what I mean by that is they don't understand that it's give and take. They don't understand it's not a competition. This is two sides of the same coin working hand in hand to make sure that justice is withheld, the Constitution is withheld of the state, of the country, and of the municipalities, and to make sure that all victims are represented properly. It's
Sure.
not just the victims that the cops deal with; it's the victims that you deal with. you know? So leading off with that statement, and I have to say, I told a couple of my cop buddies that I was interviewing you, and they're like, you gonna hammer him? I'm like, no, why? He's a good dude. So let's go this. You said you started with the public defender's office. So I worked with those folks a lot. And
Sure,
that's a tough job.
it
You
is.
come to work, you got 20 cases to deal with, and you know nothing about any of them until you pick up the file.
Right.
So how did you transition from public defenders into the realm of civil rights?
Oh man. Well, so I don't know if you remember when Allegheny County was going from like a one executive system to like a three
Hmm.
county executive system. So I came out of law school, as I said, in 93, graduated in 94. So the public defender's office was my first job.
Hmm.
Um, I was broke like most young lawyers. I'm running around municipal courts building, trying to, um, you know, put a band-aid on certain situations to make the client situation better. And then the county switches from this one executive system to a three executive system, and they fired all of the new hires, of which I was. So I literally was a PD for 6 months. Um, I didn't know how to do anything. So I went into private practice. I did that for 20 years. And, I got drained. I got disenchanted with the system, the recidivism. I was representing generational clients. Uh, you know, I was representing kids who had died. I was seeing kids of kids coming back. I just got very disenchanted by um, what I was seeing on a regular basis. And then I started feeling as if I wasn't making a difference. I'm sitting in a courtroom, I'm dealing with young DAs who really don't have much authority. They have to get authority from their supervisors who most likely were not in the courtroom. And I just said, I just I don't have any purpose. So I left the practice of law altogether, and I started selling hot dogs on Carson Street, and I did that for a year. And I had a baby during that time
Congratulations.
period, and I said,
Hot dogs ain't
so
gonna cut it.
yeah, something's got to change. I got to stop feeling sorry for myself. This is not going to work. I need to figure it out. So I sat down with myself. I had a long conversation. I said, I'm an attorney. I don't necessarily know what my path is. I don't know what God has in store for me, but I cannot walk into another criminal courthouse again. I just can't. And someone had called me and said that they had gotten pistol whipped by a police officer. I won't mention his name, but he got pistol whipped by a police officer.
Sorry,
And
I
that
don't
was
mean to laugh.
just like,
I don't mean to laugh, but when people say pistol whip, I just giggle. It's just a funny statement. Pistol whip is just funny to me.
well, that's literally what happened. I saw the video, which
On
which
the
I
video.
couldn't believe. I couldn't believe it myself. I was just like, what the heck is going on? I did, even though I didn't always agree with you guys, like I never thought that anybody would do something like that. And that's kind of what drew me in. I didn't know anything about the practice of civil rights. I had never been on the civil side. So, you know, I just said, if God, you intend for me to do this, this has to work. I had a baby. I believe my daughter was probably like 6 to 8 months old. So if it was going to work, it had to work then. And I took the case. I was able to settle the case. I made more money in that one case than I had made in any of my criminal cases over the course of a couple of months. So I said, this has to work.
Well, I tell you what, there's a parallel here. And I don't know if I don't know if you know much of my personal story because we haven't talked in a while.
Correct.
I think I reached out to you when you hired a person that I knew to work at your practice, and I reached out.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
but
It was worked out very well, I should say.
yeah, she's a great person. I'm not going to say her name, but you know who you are. I'm
She
watching you.
is
I'm
she is a
watching.
great person, and I'm glad I hired
Yeah, well, she quit, so I'm not happy. No, I'm just kidding.
her.
But I got to the same point. Like, I would go to criminal court, city court, and just be like, I don't want to be here. Like, I
Yeah,
know what's going to happen. It's going to be a 30-minute hearing when it's supposed to be a prima facie hearing. It's supposed to be in, out. Is there enough probable cause to move this up to the next level or not?
right.
And it turned out to be, half hour, 40 minutes, an hour, and you were giving full testimony in court, and the judges were allowing it to happen.
You're talking about me personally?
No, no, like the attorneys in general, the attorneys in
Oh,
calls.
okay,
The,
okay.
like I don't. You might have been out of it by then. Like, but in 2019, when I was going to court my last year, like you literally, like I was in narcotics at the time, and we're walking in there into city court, and in Philadelphia, when they go to court, they wear a balaclava over their face to identify to cover their identity. They
Oh,
don't
I
do
didn't
that.
know
They don't do that like like around places like Pittsburgh. So like
that.
you're in
Okay,
court with your face showing and you're having testimony and it's supposed to be get in, get out. Realistically, what they should do is clear the courtroom so that the only people in there are the accused and the legal teams and the officer. But the
what
cops are in
about
there.
what about the Constitution?
Well, the thing is, it's about. I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story, and this is why I have a problem with that. So I was involved in a drug bust in the North Side back in like 2017, 2018, and the Trib Live, decided to put my full name in the paper, and it was an arrest of a juvenile for delivery of heroin,
Mm,
and they put my full name in the paper, and it was a practice at that time that they usually didn't identify plainclothes and undercover detectives by name because it puts their family in jeopardy. It puts them in
sure,
jeopardy.
sure.
So my thing is this: when you're in a situation that is like narcotics, or you're in an undercover situation where not knowing who you are is a big part of your job.
Hmm.
Like not being able to walk down the street and go, "Oh, dude, that's Detective Kneebone. I know that guy."
Yeah.
It's a safety risk for those officers in that particular situation. So when it comes down to minimizing risk for the law enforcement officer in that position, knowing that their occupation is based in being surreptitious and secretive, for them to allow 150 people to see who they are, that it's a dangerous situation is what it is. It's an officer safety thing. Now, I'm not saying
Sure.
it needs to be a law, but I'm saying like, we everybody wants to protect everybody, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's just like going to having a case. If you have a case with someone who's a rape victim, like for me, I would be like, let's empty this courtroom. There should be nobody in here watching this person testify because they are being traumatized enough as it is with having to retell a story that's so traumatic and so detrimental to their mental health and just their living in general. Like I feel that should be, and this is just my personal opinion. I feel that should be something that's protected. Their mental health should be protected. Now granted, this is off on a tangent. I didn't even know I was going to go here today.
Yeah.
But you
Okay.
see what I'm saying? Like it's like it comes back to making sure that everybody's being as safe as you can be. I want to protect victims. When I was a cop, I wanted to protect victims. I didn't want them to have to go through, those brutal testimonies where, attorneys were just digging at them and digging at them and digging at them and just destroying them with verbal assaults,
Hmm.
and that's unfortunate that translate over to the law enforcement issue. There's a lot of cops out there now that don't know how to treat people. They don't know how to keep humanity first. You know what
Hmm.
I mean? And that's why, like you, as an attorney, yes, I said that out loud. Is your approach is the way you talk to me when I was at court. It's like you're there to do a good thing. You know, it may put a cop in jeopardy, but that's their fault. That's their fault for doing something that made you have to file that lawsuit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not always that, right? I mean, I talked about training. Some police officers don't know because they were never told,
Hmm.
right? So I'm sure there's a culture, right? There's a culture of coming through the system and learning at the academy what you're supposed to do as a police officer, but when you're actually on the job, you're looking for direction from somebody who has done it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if you come upon a situation and you're by yourself, and you're reacting off of instinct, maybe how you were raised, perhaps how you see life, whatever your designations are. But you haven't necessarily been told that you can't just arrest somebody because you think they're guilty.
Mhm.
You have to have specific articulatable facts that lead a reasonable person to believe that criminal activity is afoot. But if you haven't had someone to explain that to you and what it means, then you're just going off of what you think you know.
And I
And
agree.
it's only until somebody like me gets involved that I'm explaining to you that, you know, you can't do it that way.
Well, I'm kind of hard on law enforcement. You know what I mean? Like, I have a real problem with the way things are going in the law enforcement community right now. I do not like all the excessive force that has been used recently, and there is a lot of it. I mean, granted, there are situations where it is reasonable
Sure,
to use the force that they use,
sure.
but I think I'm gonna use Pittsburgh as an example. Pittsburgh is having such a hard time hiring police officers right now. They'll take anybody. It's I hate to use the phrase bottom of the barrel, but that's what is happening. They have people leaving in mass numbers because
Mhm,
they can retire and they don't want to deal with the BS anymore. Um,
mhm,
you've got officers out there that don't know when to use force. They don't know how to apply the use of force continuum. Like you can't just go right to pistol whip. It's officer presence, verbal commands, non-impact weapons, using come along holds, and then stepping up to pepper spray and moving down the chain. You know,
sure.
Anymore, I think that it's a combination of having a lack of qualified candidates. Um, I should say more qualified candidates because they're all qualified if they get hired, but more qualified candidates because common sense is not something that you're taught. You're born with it. If you don't have common sense, if you don't know that you can't just shoot somebody, you know what I mean? It's going to lead down a bad road. There's been some instances in Pittsburgh where cops have not used force when they could have to end a
Mhm,
situation, and then they've let it go far enough where they've had to use now an overwhelming amount of force because they didn't handle the situation in the early stages when they probably could have caught that quicker. You know,
sure.
like like somebody starts yelling at you as a cop, you tell them, "Listen, that's enough. Quit yelling at me." And then they want to
Yeah,
get physical, be like, "Listen, if you get physical, I'm going to arrest you. I'm going to put you in handcuffs." And communicate your responses to the folks. But I think a lot of cops now, they're taught in the academies to avoid using force. Because everyone wants a kinder, gentler law enforcement, right? They don't want militaristic law enforcement. They don't want hands-on cops. You know, but there comes points where hands-on is what has to happen.
uh-huh.
And so you as a civil rights attorney, here's the question I pose to you: like, what's the solution? This is a big question. What's the solution? We have a failing in training. We have a lack of money going into departments to do training. So how do we fix the problem? Because we need a better, more reasonable, uh, more humanitarian law enforcement out there. And I don't just mean community-oriented policing and going to the park and saying hi to people. I mean like learning how to treat people as human beings all the time and function that way in a law enforcement capacity. And unfortunately, there's some cops that don't do that right now.
Um, well, first of all, that's a great question, and it's a tough response, right? Like
Mhm.
I can share with you some of my personal feelings, and but they're just personal feelings.
Mhm.
I believe that as becoming a police officer is a very tough job. I give a lot of credit to those that are able to do it, and they've done it for a very long time, and they're respected. That's a credit to that person, right? But in the 30 plus years that I have been practicing law, I can count on one hand how many police officers have actually been fired.
Mhm.
Um, I think that the contract that the city of Pittsburgh has with the FOP is ridiculous. Um, and I don't pretend to know a whole lot about it, but what I see often, the cases that I've handled where excessive force was used, those police officers are still working. They have not lost their jobs. I sued one police agency for almost $1 million.
Mhm.
That person wasn't fired.
And I
They're
mean,
still
that's a
working.
major issue. That's a major issue. You know, like I'm not bagging on cops. I don't, I probably don't say enough how much as a whole law enforcement is doing just an amazing job of in the times that we live in with all
Yeah,
the external influence and inputs and all the Monday morning quarterback that goes on across the board. You know, they've got a
sure.
very tough job right now. Um, but like, you know, there's departments where, you know, guys have been in trouble 7, 8, 9 times. And it took shooting somebody in the hand for them to get fired the first time
Hmm.
and then to fight and bring it back and fight and bring it back. And I mean, it's a good thing that they have the protection of the union, right? The union's there to defend them when they are not exercising powers outside their abilities and their training and their rights to do so. You know, but I think now it's getting a little better. I think now more often than not, when an officer does something egregious, they're paying the price with, you know, losing their positions. But I think it's taking one extreme to the next. You know, it's never firing anybody to now people getting fired all the time. You know, and it's you know like I'm not in it anymore, right? So I'm not there to see what's going on. Every time I see a video, I'm like, well, I think this is wrong. I think that's wrong. I think he should have done this. I think he should have done Monday morning quarterback
Yeah, yeah.
because I'm like, I wouldn't have done that. You know, like there was the kid uh, probably about 4 years ago. The cop that tased like that guy for like he was like supposedly stealing a bike. He tased him like 7 or 8 times, and the guy
Uh-huh.
ended up dying afterwards. And
Right.
then they fired every cop that showed up,
Hmm.
like blanket firing every single cop that showed up. Supervisors, patrolmen, people that just showed up, didn't do anything. And of course, some of them got their jobs back. But in specific, the Pittsburgh Police Department is very reactive. So when something bad happens, the first thing I think goes through their minds is how can we make this look better? How can we make this whole mess look better? Oh, just fire everybody. You know, so I think you know every department's different, but I think there needs to be the accountability on a basic level for an officer. Granted, you have the right to take people's freedom. You know, you have the right to separate people from their children. You have the right to separate people from their families and their jobs. You know, that should be taken more seriously.
Hmm.
You know,
I agree.
I think that when some of these officers that are making big mistakes or even small mistakes that get them in trouble, it just comes down to common sense and not treating people like they're human beings. You know, treat them with respect until they don't deserve that respect anymore.
Well, let me ask you a question, right?
Mhm.
So, other than if a police officer does something bad, right? Other than being fired, what personal consequences do they suffer?
Well, you know, there's always, of course, you know, you're put on administrative leave immediately, so it's a monetary punishment,
When you
which is how you affect people. You know, they depending on what it is. I mean, if it's something egregious, like for example, if it, I hate to talk about this, but if it's racially motivated, if it's a racially motivated thing, or it's something along those lines, like cops will not work with them. And I think that's one of the biggest ways they suffer if they keep their job is that cops do not want to work with somebody who does things like that because they know that it could happen again.
So, in my personal experience, yes, they're put on administrative leave,
Hmm.
but shortly thereafter, they're hired back.
Okay.
And when they're hired back, they sue the department that put them on administrative leave, and they get back pay,
Okay.
right? So, what real personal consequence did they suffer? The person that they affected, whether that person is hurt or dead, I mean that lasts forever. So let me compare what I just asked you to maybe my role as an attorney.
Okay.
Say that I do something bad. Say that somebody hires me and I don't file their complaint on time, right? I don't do what I'm supposed to do as their legal representative.
Hmm.
What happens is that they sue me, and when they sue me, it hits my insurance. And if it happens enough times, my insurance will refuse to insure me because I'm a risk. Because I've proven in the past that I'm not good at my job. And because I'm not good at my job, they refuse to accept the risk of insuring me. And that means that I'm now personally responsible if I ever do something else and somebody sues me. I could lose my house, my car, my assets. So effectively, it puts me out of business.
Mhm.
But you don't have that same relationship when it comes to our law enforcement members. I mean, if I were to sue, and I'm not referring to you personally, but I sued John Doe police officer. John Doe police officer might make anywhere between 80 to 100 grand. My client's dead. So more likely than not, I I am not going to get anything significant from John Doe police officer. If I am going to get something significant, it would have to be against the department that he works for. Because him as an individual, he doesn't have the assets to justify the lawsuit. So, the older police officers, they know that. They know that we're not looking to take whatever they may have personally because they don't have much. Um, so to the extent that we get any legal remedy, it's going to have to come from the department. But if a police officer does something intentionally, say they act intentionally against the person that I'm representing, then the the department doesn't have any responsibility to indemnify that police officer. So my suggestion would be anybody that's working the job has to have insurance. You must personally have insurance in order to maintain your ability to act as a police officer. Like you must have a license in order to carry a gun. You must have a license in order to drive a motor vehicle. Because at that point, now you're personally responsible for your actions.
I mean, that's it. That's an interesting suggestion because I know a lot of officers get legal insurance on their own just because they want to be protected from losing everything they have if something goes bad. And it's not like they're planning on doing something illegal or not righteous. It's just, you might get in a situation that just doesn't turn out good. And officers have seconds to make a decision and a lifetime to think about it. You know,
But you're protected in those scenarios by qualified immunity.
to an extent. To an extent,
Yeah.
qualified immunity only, the way I understand it, only extends to an officer that is not in violation of any aspect of the Constitution.
No,
So
no.
if an officer violates someone's civil rights and it's a violation of that person's civil rights and it violates the Constitution, you know, they're not going to be able to have qualified immunity because they broke the law to do something. So, I mean, maybe I should rephrase my scenario. You know, somebody shoots somebody and it's a bad shooting. You know, if the police department deems that it's a bad shooting, then of course they're not going to indemnify the guy. You know what I mean? They're going to be like, you're on your own. You know what I mean? Like
No,
they're going to take their action.
they have to.
Yeah, which they
It,
should.
right, they have to. I mean,
I
qualified
agree with
immunity.
you is what I'm saying. I agree with you. I think
Yeah,
there's something that needs to be done.
right. Qualified immunity, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm saying qualified immunity protects the police officer who comes upon a situation that he as a reasonable police officer would not be aware
Hmm.
that he's breaking the law,
Correct.
right? And that makes common sense, right? I
Yeah, not
mean,
an intentional act.
right. You don't well, even if
Like
you act
premeditated.
unintentionally, you
Yeah.
could violate somebody's constitutional rights.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that the law seeks to protect the police officer if he comes upon a situation where his actions are not he's not expected to understand how to deal with that given situation,
Hmm.
given all of the past incidents of reasonable or unlawful force.
So basically,
So
go ahead.
So in those instances, you want the police officer to be protected
Yes.
because you don't want the police officer to like go to work and he's doing his job and he's doing what he believes is the right thing to do, but he doesn't know because this is a unique situation.
Yeah.
Like you don't want him in that instance to get sued because then in other instances he may not want to do anything
Yeah. So it's more of
because
acting if they're acting with malicious intent.
well, if you're acting with malicious intent, more likely than not, you're looking at punitive damages. But I'm just talking about if I come upon a situation that I've never been exposed to before, and I do something which violates your constitutional rights.
Mm.
It wasn't intentional. It wasn't because I wanted to violate. I just didn't know. I didn't
Yeah.
know because this is a unique situation. So in those instances, you want the law to protect the police officer. But when a police officer knows that what he's doing is wrong, such as you're pistol whipping somebody, like you're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
You should not be entitled to qualified immunity, and you're not going to get it. But furthermore, is that even though you've done those actions, more likely than not, you're not going to lose your job, and you're not going to be held personally responsible.
So what does it take from your position? What does it take for an officer to get fired? I'm not like a specific scenario, but like what, because the civil action, if people don't know anything about it, the civil action is not a criminal action. It's for damages. It's for
Right.
it's for, anything outside the law. So if the cop is deemed not to violate the law, he can still be sued civilly for his actions for, lost wages, medical bills, all the things that go along with that because that person feels that they were mistreated. Um, so like it's a difficult that's why I love talking to you about this right now because like I don't understand the civil aspect when it comes to like what you deal with. You know,
Yeah.
I know that, in my heart of hearts, I feel that if an officer does something egregious and that it is something that shouldn't have happened and could have been avoided, i.e., pistol whipping somebody, if it can be avoided, but then there's also the objective reasonable standard for an officer. Like if an officer is on his ground and his gun's been removed and his belt's laying on the ground, he can grab a brick and smack somebody in the head.
And he
You know?
should, right?
Yeah, because like the
Right.
weapon of last resort. Like I carried three
Right.
knives in different parts of my uniform because I was like, if I lose something, I still got knives. You know, but if you
Yeah.
go right to
Yeah.
that knife and stab somebody, then that's not right. And that's a case where I would feel you would get fired. You know,
At the end of the day, every police officer wants to come home to his or her family, right? I can't blame you for that. I could never blame an officer for that. And you're right. Sometimes officers are forced to make split-second decisions. But I also see a lot of scenarios, where the police officer does not make a reasonable attempt to de-escalate. Sometimes when you're used to telling people what to do, it's pretty hard for you to do anything different.
yeah. Just
I
ask
think
my wife.
in your case, she's probably right. You tell her I said that.
She is right.
But it's tough, right? It's tough to come on scene and you know you've been working doubles and you're doing outside work and you see this situation day in and day out, and the people that you're talking to, they're not nice. They might talk to you aggressively, and sometimes you just get tired. I know when I'm talking to my own daughter and I come home from a long day and she says something and I'm just like, oh my God, just do it. And then I listen to myself and I'm like, was that the right way to handle that, Todd? And I'm apologizing,
Yeah.
right? Because it's a tough job, right? I mean, you know, police officers seem to think that I'm really, really hard on them, but I'm not. I understand that you have a tough job to do. I get it. And I know that you're human, right? And I want you to be safe because I want to be safe.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do everything that I possibly can to make you feel safe. I'm I'm going to say yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am. I'm gonna put my hands up. Whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do it, even if I don't agree with it. I'm going to do it. But I know that everybody doesn't think the way I think, right? But I also believe that I've seen situations where a cop comes in and before they even, ask the person, hey, how was your day? I mean, sometimes that just takes the air out of the situation.
Mhm.
How was your day? You having a bad day, man? You know what I mean? How about this? How about we talk it out? Let me know what happened. What's going on? In certain situations, and I won't mention the case, but the cop comes to the scene. The person is trying to explain, hey, I didn't do what they said I did. And before this person is treated like a human, the police officer is doing stuff that he shouldn't be doing. Stuff that probably would not happen to you, probably wouldn't even happen to me because of my status in life. But it happened to this person because the police officer didn't value the person. He saw the person as less than. And if he would have just took 5 or 10 minutes to listen, he would have found that the person didn't do the thing that he was being accused of.
There's a
And
lot
then you wouldn't have to get to all the other stuff on the use of force continuum. The hands-on and the tasing and the calling for backup and all that other nonsense. Like you wouldn't have to get to that. And I would think, as I mean, I'm 57, right? I'm 57. So in my stage in life, I don't want to go hands-on with nobody. I can get hurt. You know what I mean? Like,
of.
I don't want to go hands on with nobody. So I might talk a good game, but the bottom line is, bro, I want to work this out with you so that you don't feel as if you need to put your hands on me, and I don't put myself in a situation where I may have to put my hands on you because I can't afford it either way.
Mhm.
But certain police officers, they're a part of this culture where violence and the use of force is it's it's applauded. It's it's accepted. It's like, oh, you're in a certain district and this is the way we do things.
Mhm.
Well, that's the problem. And if you have one police officer that in their mind they know that that's not the way things should go, but if they were to say anything, now they make themselves a risk.
I mean, there's a lot of guys there's a lot of, I'm not gonna say a lot of people, but there are people that do the job as a police officer that were shoved in lockers as kids, were bullied and abused. And once they got out of the academy, it's like, now I can get back at the world. I can tell everybody what to do. I can make people do what I tell them to do. Listen, I worked with a guy, you know, just total pain in the ass. Every time you got to a call, like you had settled down and he shows up and then it gets ramped up a little bit and you got to take all that work to bring it back down again.
Yeah.
Like, as a cop, I thought I was good at one thing. I was mediocre at most things, but I was good at talking to people. I was a
Yes,
mediocre
you
cop
are.
across the board, but I was good at talking to people. So in my career, if you went through all my cases, like there was maybe on a handful of times I had to throw punches or
Mhm.
tackle people to the ground or, use any kind of like escalated use of force, like, tasing and stuff like that. Maybe 10 times, you know,
Sure.
and it wasn't, granted I was 6'3", 260 pounds with all my equipment on. I was a big dude.
Mhm.
So a lot of times that helped, because people are like,
Sure.
I don't think I want to fight that guy right now. I could probably
Yeah.
outrun him. But I don't want to fight him. So, but my mentality was always hit first and hit hard.
Right.
So if I had to use force, I was knowledgeable enough in what I was allowed to do. Then I knew that if a guy punched me, I could punch him back. If a
Sure.
guy kicked me, I could kick him back. If a guy comes at me with a knife, I can shoot him. I mean, it's simple rules, but I was able to apply those rules as a last resort, but apply them at the right time.
Sure.
You know what I mean? I think that's something, I think you hit on it by saying, officers get the situation they've never seen before. You know, it, throughout the career of a law enforcement officer, you're going to see something you didn't know how to handle almost every day of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Because everything's so chaotic. Granted, it's 99% boredom and 1% insane, but there's like 8,000 varieties of burglar alarms. There's like 8,000 varieties of domestic violence. Like they're never the same. No
Sure.
call is ever the same. So, if a law enforcement officer approaches a call the same way he approaches every call of that nature, then they're setting themselves up for failure. Because
Okay.
if you remove the ability to adjust on the fly and evaluate the situation, evaluate the parties involved, read the room or
Absolutely.
read the space and figure out, okay, this guy is super fucking aggressive right now. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
stay back and I'm just going to talk really soft, really polite, be like, bro, what's up, man? Talk to me. Tell me what's going on. But
Right.
then you got that guy that's like real quiet and doesn't want to talk to you. Then you got to sit there and be like, bro, like, come on. You got to raise your voice. It's okay to tell a guy to fuck off as a police officer. It's okay. If they're yelling and screaming at you, tell them they're going to kill your family. Be like, "Fuck you! You're going to jail pretty soon, so you might want to get ready for this." You know,
Right.
but it really does come back. I think you hit on it with the biggest key of this whole thing is that it comes in training and experience. Um,
Absolutely.
in a city like Pittsburgh, you get it very quickly. We're such a big city, a big small city.
Mm-hmm.
2007, we average over 350,000 calls for service across the 6 zones in the city. I mean, that's a lot. You get Ross
Yeah.
Township, they do like 5,000 a year. And that's
Sure.
mostly burglar alarms and parking complaints and, oh, somebody left the door open, you know? So, what would be your advice to someone who wants to become a police officer? What kind of advice would you give them? Being that you've been on the prosecutor side, you've been private attorney, and now you're doing the civil rights thing. Like, what would
Yeah.
you tell an officer? What kind of advice would you give them, like somebody getting ready to go to the academy?
Oh man. So boy, you asked all the great
I'm good
questions.
at this shit. I'm good at this
I,
shit.
I, I was able to advocate for a police officer that I believe was being about to be fired, and I was on a case with a family member of that police officer, and I got involved because I believed that he was a good person,
Mhm.
and I believed that he shouldn't have been impacted by his family members' actions. So I got involved. And I don't know whether my involvement helped him get his job back or whatever, but I do know that I believed in that person.
Mhm.
And I don't necessarily have any particularities as to how a police officer should go about the process of going to the academy and the education that you get. But I believe that you should find, when you get the job, you should find somebody that you trust, somebody that you believe in the police force that's doing the job right. And you should become a mentee of that person. Um, the culture in some of the police forces that I have seen advocate go along to get along. They advocate the blue line, and it doesn't matter whether you're right or wrong, just as long as you don't buck the system. And I have a problem with that. I
And
don't.
we all
I
should.
don't.
We
I'm
all should.
sorry.
We all should.
Yeah, but we don't, right? I mean, like, you want to go home at the end of the day. If you see somebody doing something improperly as a police officer, and you see another officer doing something improper, more likely than not, that person is somebody that you're very close to. Maybe you've gone to football games, you've gone to that person's house, you've got to know their children, their wives. That this person is somebody that you trust to protect your life. And more often than not, that's the way they see it. They don't necessarily see blue line. They see family. They see friend. They see the guy that I played softball with during the summer times. And they're not going to step out and point that finger at that person, because who knows, maybe a year from that point, maybe that person is protecting them when they did something improper. And then that history goes on. And now a couple of instances become a culture, and
Mhm.
then there's no supervision. Why are you turning your body cam off, Officer John Doe? Why did you turn your body cam off when you had this interaction with, John Q. Public, right? And then what consequences did you face? Or maybe it wasn't you. Maybe it was another police officer that you heard turn their body cam off. And you know that that person faced no consequences.
Mhm.
So now you just learned something. You just educated yourself that whenever you get into a situation where somebody might be mouthing off or somebody might be saying something that you don't like, maybe you had a bad day, argue with the wife, or the girlfriend is not acting the way you want her to act, and you show up on scene and this person is basically pissing you off, and you're like, oh, okay, I know how to handle this situation. Boop.
Yeah.
Who's gonna who's gonna tell? You're not gonna tell on your partner, likely, because your partner knows your secrets.
In all honesty, I was very lucky in my career. I worked with people I didn't like how they did things because I'm
Sure.
OCD. So, anybody who ever worked with me, you remember me. I was the guy that had to do everything my way every single time. The report had to be written according to the way I wanted to do it because I was so OCD in what I was doing. Because, when I arrested somebody, I took it very seriously because I was taking someone's freedom,
Sure.
and I think that gets lost in translation sometimes. People forget how big of a power and how big of a responsibility that is. That you are separating somebody from their life. So you got to take it seriously. You know, um, I think you hit on something big right there because you mentioned how you have a bad day. The cop has a bad day at home, or a bad day with the girlfriend, or the wife's chewing him up. That happens more often than not,
It does.
and sometimes it's very difficult. It was for me to separate work from home and vice versa. I think that's probably a big cause of what happens. I think that's probably plays a big part in it.
Hmm.
Why officers do things that aren't legit sometimes. Um, but like I just separated myself from those officers. I just tried not to work with them. Like if I had a call and they were coming, I said, nah, I don't need them. I'm good. Granted, I put more risk on myself sometimes, but I was
Yeah.
like, I heard the voice over the radio. I was like, no, no, I'm good. I'm good. Just don't come anywhere near my call. You know what I
You
mean?
want to know why I agreed to do your podcast?
Because I'm awesome.
Yes. That is the exact reason why. Because when I met you, you were kind, you were endearing, you were personable. I knew that if I stepped out into the hallway with you and you told me it happened this way, I could trust that what you were telling me was the truth. When I read your reports, I trusted that when you said it happened that way, that it happened that way. And that's why you and I never had any problems.
Mhm.
But I'm from East Hills. I'm from Wilkinsburg. I know how things happen. I mean, in some of the scenarios, I was the person that was being stopped. So
Mhm.
I knew how things happen. I know how to read a report. I know what, so I'll give you a secret of mine, right? So what speaks louder to me in a report is not what's said, it's what's not said,
Mhm.
right? But when I always spoke to you, I always got the sense that what you were saying to me was true. And that's why, I was willing to listen. That's why I was willing to be amicable and I was willing to work things out with you because I trusted you. I didn't have that same relationship with a lot of people.
Mhm.
And it's my hope, that through this conversation that we're having, even though we were once on opposite sides of the table, that, officers realize that my goal is not to demean you as a police officer. I respect you. I respect what you do. But I respect you so much that I have to hold you accountable because you have great power.
Mhm.
You have the ability, once those handcuffs go on somebody, whether that person was found guilty or not, they're never, ever, 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 ever going to forget that experience. Never.
Agree.
Because you took their freedom away from them.
You know what they tell you in
So
the academy a lot of times? They ask you what's your most important and valuable weapon slash tool.
yeah, I know. I
That's what
heard
they
it
tell you.
before.
That's what they tell you. And I think people like they joke about it and they laugh about it, but it's like no shit. Like this is the real deal, right? This thing can cost people millions and millions of dollars, you know? So I think once number one, I appreciate you saying that because I joke around, I say I was mediocre across the board, but the only thing I take away from it is I could sleep at night.
You weren't mediocre. You were exceptional. You were exceptional, and that's why I agreed to do this. I'm not looking for the spotlight anymore. I'm
Yeah.
just I'm just looking to create a better legacy for myself, and hopefully for the people that live in the city of Pittsburgh. I mean, I genuinely care.
Yeah.
When I was involved, I mean, now I don't even accept cases unless I can impact change.
Yeah.
If the client is only interested in money, I'm not really interested because, money is not my motivating factor anymore. It
Well,
was at one point in my life, but
oh,
but it's not
everybody.
anymore. Yeah.
Everybody is at one point, but like that's why I asked you to do this because, I don't know if I could talk to another civil rights attorney if I didn't know them. Because, like I said, we were talking before we went on camera about how I was involved in a couple federal lawsuits, and
Mhm.
they just treated me like shit. And it really got underneath my skin because it's like, it's two sides of the coin again. Like when, for example, federal depositions, when you go to those, hey cops, guess what? You have to answer every question. You don't get a right to say no. Um,
Mhm.
but there's a way to handle that, and there's a way not to handle it. Like we should, as law enforcement, treat people with respect. But on the
Absolutely.
same side of that coin, civil rights attorneys sometimes, just like every other field, sometimes there's good ones and bad ones. Sometimes they go out of their way to be accusatory and treat you as a hostile person. You know what I mean? Treat you in that nature, and you don't do that. You know?
I don't think that bodes well with the jury.
No, I mean, I've had a
Yeah.
lot of cases where the cops, if they testified, they're being dicks, and you'd hear everybody in the courtroom being like, you'd hear all the whispers. You know what I mean? But I think sometimes the attorneys get a little bit more leeway with that because
No, I think that most people respect police officers, and if you're being overly harsh and aggressive with a police officer, I think you're looked upon in a negative fashion.
see,
And
here's where I'm going to differ with you because this
okay,
is just my experience. When you're in a municipal courts building, you remember that place, and
I
you've
do.
got 75 people waiting to have their case against a cop that took away their freedom.
Uh-huh.
There's already an element in that room that is uptight, stressed out, emotionally heightened.
That's a different venue though. That's not a jury.
I
Those are
know. I'm
people
not
who
saying
have
I'm
been
not saying
arrested.
no. And I was talking about civil rights depositions. Uh,
You're talking about city court.
yeah. So, like I was saying, like depositions. Like for example, like we were talking, I had this guy from Philadelphia just treated me like I was a pile of dog shit, and I didn't respond very well to that. You know. Now then I went to like the city court and talking about city court. City court's a volatile venue in general because everybody's emotionally heightened, everybody's stressed out, everybody's worried about what's going to happen. So, I would see times when attorneys would get shitty with a cop and people would start laughing in the background and like it didn't bother me because it's like I get it, you know what I mean? Like this is not a fun time for you. Granted, you were accused of doing something that got you locked up or got you a fine or got you a ticket and you're not happy. You don't want to be here. Um, but I think in that environment specifically, I think there's a little more leeway. Of course, it's city court. There's a lot of leeway in city court. Um, but like I said, I invited you because you know, knowing you from 15 years ago, you haven't changed. You're the same guy I met. When I was green behind the ears, and I'm going, dude, what am I supposed to do with this case? Like, help me out here. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. You know, um, but I think like so far we've hit on a couple really important things that affect an officer's ability to do their job effectively and righteously. And I like the word righteous because
It's a
I
good
think
word.
it means more. I think it
Yeah,
means more than saying they do a good job. If you're
yeah,
doing it righteous, that means you can go home at night, you can sleep knowing you didn't do anything stupid and you didn't
absolutely.
mistreat people. I said it before. I've worked with people that are just complete asshats, that shouldn't be cops.
Right.
And unfortunately, I think there's more and more of those people getting hired now because the hiring pool is so much less. You
Mhm.
mentioned the city contract with the police officers. I found some shit out. from Tony Moreno, the Republican candidate for mayor. He was on here a couple months ago.
Mm.
The pension that's paid out, the city contributes to the pension on behalf of EMS, fire, and police. EMS gets like 17% paid into there by the city. I think the firemen got around 27%, and the cops get like 7%.
Mm.
So the city itself, the governing body of this wonderful city we live in, basically says on a financial level, cops are worth less than everybody else.
Mm.
They contribute less to their pension than everything else. And to me, that's an egregious wrong. You know, still for the size of the city of Pittsburgh Police Department, they get paid less than most small departments. You know, I think they're up to like 80,000 a year, or somewhere around that 78,000 a year now, or something like that. And you've got Monroeville making 110. You've got Penn Hills advertising 120. You know, and that's to work a 40-hour week. So now you add in exhaustion and burnout and stress levels, because cops in the city are working almost twice as much as the other people are in other departments to make the same money. So I think, you know, a city like Pittsburgh is doing its citizens a disservice in paying their officers what they pay them. Because now, like I said, you get a cop that goes to court at 8 o'clock in the morning. He's there till noon. Then he's got like a break. Then he comes back. He's there at court through the afternoon. Then the guy or girl's got to go straight to work and work a 10-hour shift. You know, and then in your narcotics, when I finished up, I mean, you're doing all kinds of other stuff at weird hours of the day. So like, you know, now being a truck driver, I work 12 to 14 hours a day straight through.
Right.
You know, instead of working 18 hours in the course of 24, but it's spread out throughout the day. You know, those folks are, you know, if you do it long enough, you're going to burn out. Kind of like you said with criminal court.
Yeah.
You know, you can't avoid it.
But I think let me put it to you this way, all right? So I told you about when I left the practice, right? When my son passed away and I got depressed, I decided that I could no longer help my clients in a meaningful way. But because I did not believe in my heart that I could be the best lawyer for them, I left the practice. Right? Because I don't want to do it and do it half-assed and potentially affect somebody's freedom. There's no greater responsibility as an attorney than to make sure that what you're doing is effective and that you're zealously advocating for your clients. Whatever that means, whether that means going to the jail to visit your clients, going to the crime scene, answering the calls when they call, you know, giving them meaningful responses to their questions, not just passing them off and, you know, and just taking the money. You know, I believe that if you accept someone's case, you have a responsibility to do the very best job that you can. And at that point in my life, I did not believe that I could do that. So I literally bought a hot dog cart and I sat up on Carson Avenue and I sold hot dogs, and I did that for a year.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because that's something I wasn't going to touch on at all, and I wasn't going to ask about your personal life. But
It's okay.
I appreciate you opening up. I mean, that opens up my mind to a whole different level. So I'm going to guess that you've had some issues with mental health in the past.
Well, I don't want to say
not saying you're like crazy, but I'm saying like lose a son.
When my son passed away, yeah, I could not tell you to this day some of the things that happened during his funeral. And I think that the mind does these things to protect it, you know, when you're exposed to great sorrow and grief. And as an attorney, we take on people's problems. You pay me to take on your problem. So that means that my own personal health and well-being gets pushed to the back because I'm trying to deal with that client's personal issues. And therefore, the mental health of the attorney is always secondary to somebody else's issues. But at that point, my mental health had to be primary to me,
Mhm.
and I needed to take the time and effectively not hurt someone while I was trying to figure out what I was going to do in the next phase of my life.
Mhm.
And when I had my daughter, helped me through that process because I had something to live for. I wasn't just I didn't have time to feel sorry for myself because God gave me this responsibility and this child didn't ask to come here. And I needed to get my SHIT together so that I could be the best parent for her that God expected me to be. And that's how I ultimately became a civil rights attorney. And I'd practiced criminal law for 20 years. I knew how to read a police report. I knew a lot of the police officers. I knew how the system worked. And it was not something that I had to read. I mean, of course, I had to relearn certain things, but it was a natural transition from what I had already known.
So you touched on it a little bit, but how did you work through such a harsh trauma,
Traumatic event.
such a trauma that, it's hopefully nobody deals with that, losing a kid. Um, but I mean, and you go as far as you want with this. I'm not going to push it, but I just wanted to know, like, what did you do to get out of that, to get through the hard times?
Uh, I think for me, it took a lot of reflection, a lot of interpersonal review and acceptance of my flaws, and a realization um, that I wasn't in the right mental space that I needed to be in. And I have an A personality, so I like to be in a position of leading. Yeah, yeah, right. You have an A personality. Well, you understand. So yeah, you're accustomed to being in a position of leading, but I started to doubt myself. Right, I started wondering if if I could be the person that this client needed me to be. And I think whenever you start doubting yourself, whenever you start questioning your abilities, at that point you need to reflect. You need to get out of it because you're going to hurt somebody. And that's the same thing for a police officer. If you're dealing with something personal, something that your home life isn't in balance, and now you're expected to be balanced, as soon as your shift starts, that's an unreasonable expectation.
That's
You know,
that's part of the, it's probably the biggest reason why I left law enforcement when I did. Now, granted, I couldn't tell you why I did it when I did it, because I was just drinking all the time and I was a hot mess. But excuse me, I mean, my life was falling apart around me, and the only thing that was stable was work. And that started to suffer, and I was just like, I was just in that drunk brain. I'm like, I'm just gonna quit. I'm just gonna move. I'm just gonna move. I'm just gonna quit. Move on. Granted, the best decision I've ever made next to marrying my wife. Um, but
I see it a little bit. I see it a little bit differently because I
okay.
think I obviously I don't know you. You and I have always been on the same point, but I think that at some point you said if I don't change what I'm doing, I'm going to hurt somebody
Mhm.
or I'm going to hurt myself.
I think we had that conversation before, actually. Like,
Right.
frankly, yeah. I mean, that's where I was.
And you had the strength to accept that because if you're always telling yourself I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay, right? Then you're never really being honest with yourself.
Mm.
So then you get in this position, your clock starts, you get put in a confrontational situation, and you're already unbalanced because your life isn't balanced.
Oh, I was unbalanced, all right.
Right. And then somebody like strikes a nerve, and the next thing you know what I mean, like you're on channel 11.
When I knew that things were headed to a point where there was going to be a collision of my personal and my work life, was when I was coming to work and I was like finding that I wanted to go physical more often. Now, granted, I didn't act on it, but like my instinct was to go physical much quicker.
Yes.
And to me, if you go into a situation expecting it to become physical, you're asking for a nightmare. Now, you can go and be there and be prepared for it, like as you should. You shouldn't go into any call without game planning your way to that call and going, okay, let's get my shit straight right now. Let's go. This could be good. This could be bad. Let's just see what happens. But I'm ready to go if I got to go. You know,
Right.
once I realized that, like I said, at the time, I didn't know that that's what it was because I was so convoluted with poor mental health and my alcoholism that I didn't see the reasons. I just knew that I didn't want to do it anymore.
Right.
And like you said, interpersonal work. One of the biggest things I talk about is self-awareness.
Absolutely.
It's one of the biggest things in AA, dealing with your character flaws. But like, if you don't know who you are on a base human level and you don't understand why you do things, you're not going to be able to effectively change those things to be a more productive human being. That's why I got the logo behind me, share, help, repeat. Like it's, by quitting the police department and struggling in the trucking business until I got the job I wanted and struggling with my mental health and recovery and, you know, getting out and getting clean and getting sober and working and working and working on a daily basis, I've determined that deep down I'm a good person with
Amen.
some really screwed up character flaws, you
We
know.
all, we
Um,
all,
but if I never got diagnosed with the PTSD, the depression, the anxiety, I would have never had a common enemy to go after. You know what I mean? Because I say, addiction, mental health, they're a war of attrition. He who fights the longest wins, and the devil has unending resources. So we have to understand who we are as a human on a very base level in order to affect change on ourselves, let alone to affect change in the world we live in.
sure.
So I'm going to applaud you for doing what you needed to do to get yourself straight, to get back in the fight and get back in the game and escalate your career to where you are now. Because, I didn't know you were selling hot dogs on the street because I probably would have came down there and made fun of you. But,
It was humbling. It was humbling. It was, I saw lawyers who came and they were whispering in line while I was asking the people whether they wanted ketchup or mustard. And, and it bothered me. And I was sad, but I did what I had to do because I realized I couldn't do the other thing. And I want to applaud you as well. I want to applaud you for this platform that you have. I want to applaud you for being so objective and personal with me and working on your own demons and and accepting them for what they are so that you could become a better person. And I pray that when some of your ex police officers or present police officers, when they see this, they realize that I'm not the mean person that they seem to think I am. I don't just go after every cop, um, and I'm not really even going after them. I just want my daughter when she walks through the streets of the city. I want her to be safe.
Mhm.
I want your baby to be safe. Whom I've never met, right? I've never met your child or
I
your
don't have
daughter.
kids. So
Well,
my
let's
wife,
say
my
your
wife,
niece, your nephews, your cousins,
yeah,
whomever they are. They don't necessarily have to come to me and say, Mark is my relative, right? I want them to be safe. I want them to feel safe. I want everybody to feel safe. And no, I don't advocate that people. I don't even like these videos where I see, people being disrespectful to police officers, on TikTok and on YouTube and all the other nonsense. Like, nobody should have to deal with that during their 8-hour shift. Like, that's just crazy. You know what I mean? Like,
if I didn't have to use social media to try to promote my podcast and try to get the message out, I wouldn't be on it. Um, because I think social media has caused so many problems in our society, from law enforcement to domestic violence to the political separation that we're going through right now. Like, so many things negatively have come out of social media. So I hate it. You
I
know,
completely agree.
I hate
I
it.
I completely agree. It's gotten to a point where respect is just uncommon. It's not common.
Yeah, it's not to the point where you are respected until you do something to not deserve that respect anymore. Like when I was a kid, I'm 51. So when I was a kid, you met somebody who was like, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
That's
No,
right.
ma'am. No, sir.
That's
And,
right.
and you could sit there and go, that guy's kind of a blowjob. I don't really like that guy very much. But, there's that common level of humanity and respect. And that's gone out the window. That
It's
doesn't
gone
exist
out the
anymore.
window.
It
Yeah.
doesn't exist anymore. People treat people expecting to get their respect, like like entitlement, I guess is the word.
Absolutely.
The
Absolutely.
entitlement that you deserve more than what you're getting just because you're alive. Listen,
Absolutely.
I went through a period where I didn't think I deserved anything. When back in May, when I wanted to put May of 2023, when I wanted to shoot myself in the head. Uh,
Oh, Jesus. I'm
yeah,
glad
we'll
you
talk
did.
about that off camera a little bit if you want. But
Yeah.
when that happened, and I just didn't care about anything anymore, and I just wanted everything to stop. I had a come to God moment, and I had people call it a epiphany. No, no, literally, I just got lucky and passed out and didn't kill myself, and woke up the next day going, yeah, something's got to change. Like my life has got to get better. So I was in the darkest of dark areas and having those mind thoughts and just struggling to get through the day. But I'll tell you what, since I've been sober, and like I said, 28 months yesterday, longest I've been sober since
Congratulations.
longest I've been sober since 17. And now every day I'm learning something about myself. I'm a narcissist. I can be selfish. I can be easy to anger. I can be unreasonably, ridiculously stupid at times, but I was lucky enough to meet a woman who met me 10 months into my sobriety, where the first date was spent me telling her, are you sure you want to do this? Are you absolutely sure you don't want to run out that door right now? Because I am a handful. And here we are married, been married since June, got a house in Monroeville together, got two beautiful dogs, got a great house, got everything we ever, we're working on getting everything we ever wanted. But the moral of the story is share, help, repeat. If we don't talk, if you and I don't have these conversations, granted, I don't have the biggest platform, but whoever watches this is going to see the genuine Todd Hollis, who you are as a person. And that's why I wanted you on here, is because I think what you do, whether I like civil rights attorneys or not, I think there's a right way to do things in every aspect of the professional realm.
Amen.
And you, my friend, by putting humanity first, are doing it right.
Thank you very much for saying that.
Yes,
Thank you for inviting me to your platform. You and I are neighbors because I live in Monroeville as well. So
nice.
I
Let's get
will be
together for
coming
lunch.
by so that I can meet your girlfriend, fiance.
Yes, yes.
And
We're actually married now, and I live over in Turnpike Gardens,
you did say you were
Northern
married.
Pike, Northern Pike. Yep.
I know exactly where that is. I
Yeah.
pass it every day.
Yeah. About a mile and a half up 280 from up Northern Pike from 286.
I know exactly where it is.
We will have to get together for lunch, my friend.
I,
We'll have you over for dinner.
on me.
No, no, I'm gonna make my wife cook for you. Actually, she's
Okay.
gonna cook for you. I can't make her do anything because she's
I'll
Latino.
be there.
She's Mexican. She don't listen to me. She does whatever the fuck she wants. Yeah, man. Listen, hey, thank you so much for doing what you do. Thank you for having an open, honest, and transparent conversation with me, because that's what this is for. So, you have anything you want to say to the viewers, the listeners? Any little like tidbit of advice or information you want to give them before we check out of here?
I just really want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for having an open mind and inviting me here. Although you probably, heard not great things about me, but you were willing to take a chance. God has blessed me with being your friend for a very, very, very long time, and I'm honored. And I don't care how big the platform is, what I'm taking away from this conversation will stay with me for the rest of my life. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And here's to another 20 years.
Amen, brother.
All right, folks, this was a Steel City Roundtable. Thank you for showing. Thank you for listening to my man, Todd. Just remember, the goal is share, help, repeat. It's a way to live a better life. And until we see you next time.